Hello and welcome to the Features of the Night podcast. I am your host along with, oh wait, how am I going to introduce three people? I've never done a podcast with three people before.
Oh, it's okay. You can do it. We believe in you.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is VampireKitten. I go by VK. You will often hear me referred to as that. And you two are?
I am Mickle Mackle. You can call me Mickle or Mackle or get creative. I don't know.
And I'm Johnny.
And Johnny.
Like how that was so direct. It's like I'm VK, VampireKitten, Mickle Mackle, Johnny.
Johnny is 7 minutes in Devon.
Yes.
Online. We have all gotten together to create. I feel like this is going to be very special. And I say that because we have been watching movies together, all three of us, for upwards of a year and a half, just together in like the most random, crazy movies that we could possibly ever see.
Yeah, like things that probably should not have been made.
Yeah, definitely.
That's why starting this year, I decided to start like keeping a list of everything we watched. So at the end of the year, I can count how many movies we've watched.
I feel bad. I feel like we should have like made that list at the start of last year, but we just didn't.
It's a 2025 resolution.
I think I've watched more movies in the last year than I have in the last like 10 years.
I think I've watched more movies last year than I have in my entire life.
I consume so much media because I work remotely a lot, and so I just put a movie on and I listen to it. A lot of the times, like, I can watch all of those old movies and stuff because I've run out of modern things to watch. So that's why I'm like really excited that I found like a couple of people who are also interested in doing that. It's ridiculous, but like I've seen so much media. Like it's crazy how much media I think I've watched, and I feel like we should put it to good use. And that's sort of why the podcast is becoming a podcast. Or the watch party has become a podcast.
Well, I think that's the thing too. Like we were talking about it before we started the show, and I hope y'all enjoy it with us because the three of us really, in a non-arrogant way, have like taste for horror. But when you have a taste for something, you devour everything, and that means in a way we've gone tasteless as well. We will consume anything and everything. And we've watched, we were going through like Art House for a while, and then we're like, let's watch this fucking movie about somebody who kills in the name of Grease.
Yeah. And we all got together. Just, I guess let's preface this because we're probably never going to talk about this again. We all got together through a gaming server, like a gaming roleplay server, my 5M server. And we all just became fast friends, and we just talk every day, and now this is a thing. This is what this has become. So when this all started, we were just gaming together, and now we just consume so much media together. It's like insane. I am an artist. If you don't know about me, you can find me VampireKitten everywhere on the internets. I do podcasts, I do streaming, I create YouTube videos, I'm on Patreon, I model, I like to say like I'm an artist entrepreneur.
You can also juggle.
I can't juggle. Actually.
Wow, okay. Well, I was trying to plug your shit.
You can't do that. Dang, you found something. I can't juggle or draw. I guess that's something I can't do.
That is patently a lie.
I can't draw.
I like if you were to give me a piece of paper and a pencil, I could like make something kind of, but like I can't like draw. Like there are some people that are super talented, and that is like one thing that I'm not into, really.
You can paint.
I love painting.
And don't even downplay it. VK here painted her corgis as a tarot card, and it is some of the best stuff I've seen recently. It's so cute.
I need to put that on a shirt.
You really do.
I would wear that shirt.
I would too.
I think I might have to get myself one as well.
Yeah, VK and I also do a lot of art together. We're trying to build that as well. You'll find me around. I am on Twitch. I have not consistently streamed. I want to change that this year. I am Mickle Mackle. And you can find me on Blue Sky as Mickle Mackle Art. I'm currently on Instagram right now, but I'm also trying to kind of rebrand there. But I make zines, I draw, I paint, I have existential crises,
and I'll put all this in the description.
Cool.
And Johnny,
I'm not as
Johnny is just
talented as these two.
extremely well versed in horror movies.
And crochet.
And crochet.
And crochet, yes, I do
Don't
crochet.
downplay your art. You do crochet.
I do crochet, but I can't draw to save my life. I am
good company.
Known as 7 minutes on Devon, pretty much 7 minutes
on Devon.
in Devon. 7 minutes in Devon across most social media platforms.
Well, I guess that's us.
Yeah, but yes, I want to add one thing. I am kind of a snob when it comes to horror movies, and I would like to thank you, BK, because you have kind of like forced me to watch really, really bad movies, regardless of how I feel about them. And you introduced me to things I would have otherwise never seen, like Hard Rock Zombies, which by far,
I love that movie.
fantastic film.
Which we will more than likely cover on this podcast
today. Actually, that is a great segue into our topic for today. The episode is called, what do we call it? Greasehouse. Greasehouse. Oops. It's almost like I didn't make notes.
Listen, it's fine. Greasehouse, gross out horror. That's kind of our theme for the day. We were jokingly calling it Greasehouse after one of our main subjects for today, the Greasy Strangler.
Yeah. We're here to get down and dirty, greasy, grimy side of horror movies today.
I ate bacon for breakfast and I just rubbed it all over my face to get in preparation.
I had garlic bread at lunch and I literally just dipped it into the thing of butter and then threw it in the oven.
I had carrot sticks.
I just want you to know that I was lying about the bacon thing, but I love that I just went like greasier carrots.
I was not lying about the garlic bread.
Oh my gosh.
Work.
You're the only
you
one
are
that's
the
prepared.
greasy
strangler. I am the greasy strangler. I love garlic.
So let's talk about the topic a little bit, perhaps, just to kind of, I guess, some of you probably, it's that, like, if you know, you know. So we want to make sure that everybody knows. What would y'all say are kind of tropes of gross out horror? How could somebody who hasn't watched gross out horror, like, how could they identify it? It's probably kind of obvious, but that's okay.
What would be the most popular? Let's find the most popular gross out horror movie. One that everybody's probably seen.
I would say like maybe Saw, like the Saw series, or The Thing, Texas Chainsaw.
So I think those kind of run a fine line though, because it's like none of these categories, and I hope that y'all will listen to this and not think we're like trying to define anything permanently or say that this is exclusively what they are. No category generally is mutually exclusive from a separate one. Gore overlaps with gross out horror.
I think we're talking more or less like John Waters' Divine Eating Dog Poop gross out horror. Like, I feel like that's kind of the level we're sort of talking about. Like, that's why the Greasy Strangler, which we'll go back to that one because I know we keep talking about it. For those who haven't seen it, it is honestly, if that's not the definition of gross out horror, I don't really know what is, because it is wild. Like, it is. Trauma also kind of falls in there, but we're gonna do a whole episode on trauma. Like,
yeah,
on its own,
we'll touch on trauma today, but we have a whole episode planned for that.
Honestly, I feel like some of the earlier gross out horrors are like street trash.
Yes.
I need to see the remake of that.
I haven't seen it either.
Because it just...
We'll have to watch party that one.
We watched the first one together.
No. The remake. We haven't watched it yet.
Oh, okay. I got confused. I'm sorry.
So Johnny, you were the one who introduced me to street trash. Can you kind of tell us, like, what's the plot, just loosely? What makes it gross out horror?
So it is think of... I don't want to use Traumaville as an example, but like it's like a rundown city. There's a lot of homeless people. There's this guy that owns a liquor store. He finds this box, I think, in his basement of this liquor called it's called Tenafly Viper, and it's this really, like, it smells really bad, but he sells it to the homeless people for like $1 a bottle. But when they drink it, their body literally melts and it just becomes like this rainbow slime nightmare. Like a guy literally melts into a toilet while he's like taking a shit.
I
think that sums it up pretty well.
I think gross out horror, it has to do with a lot of, the crossover, I think if there was like a Venn diagram, it would be poop, like toilet humor, some fetishes, and like
Body melting.
body horror, like, but it has to be, it's very specific body horror.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too. Like none of these categories are mutually exclusive, and I think that's the cool thing about gross out horror, because like we picked Saw as our example first and then moved to Street Trash, which are such radically different movies. There isn't denying that gore is often disgusting.
Yeah.
But it's disgusting for a different reason than, say, the guy who's melting and becoming a rainbow blob in his own filth and excrement.
Like, I think this stuff could also be categorized as...
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely. I only reference Saw because I feel like that's the movie that everyone has seen, or like everyone knows.
No.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not invalidating anything you're saying. I'm just pointing out that like you have this category that's so wide sweeping that you can watch Saw one day and watch The Greasy Strangler the next and be like, how are these two movies connected?
I feel like Saw is a lot of different movies. Like, it's a lot of different categories. Because it's not just, I think it's gross out, but it's also gore. Because the needles, and then they have, like, a lot of blood and crunching.
It's thriller, it's horror.
It's thriller, it's horror.
Because
like
of, like the crime aspect of it. Like there's the detectives who are constantly chasing Jigsaw and trying to find like who he is, why he's doing this.
Yeah. So I think that Saw is a really good, just a good example of horror overall. Like if you were to be like, yeah, a horror movie that everyone should know is Saw. Like just because it touches on everything, and I think that's really cool.
And taking this a step further, for gross out horror, those who know, and those who don't, think of the grossest thing, something that makes you cringe, something that makes you have a gut response that is, I want to throw up now, or I feel queasy, or I'm going to pass out, because it's so disgusting. That is basically what gross out horror aims to invoke within each of us. And, something that might be gross to you might not be gross to somebody else. I personally don't like the texture of Jell-O. Other people love it. But with gross out horror, there is undeniably this goal to basically make people
disgusted.
Yes.
Yeah.
I need to take a shower after watching this movie.
That's how I felt watching The Greasy Strangler, to be honest.
Do you want to jump into The Greasy Strangler?
I feel like we should. Well, so I did, before we go into that, I did a little bit of research, and I can't find like the earliest example of gross out horror. The only thing I can really, that's like noteworthy, is anything that John Waters has made, or Todd Browning. Those were like the earliest that were like even considered gross out horror. While they're just camp now, really, if you think about it. That's just the earliest, like, the categorization of this. I mean, there's other things, like, there's gross out movies, and mainstream media did, like, Animal House, Superbad, Porky's, American Pie. These are all listed on the gross out page on Wikipedia, by the way. But they're not really, like, horror movies, and I couldn't really find anything that was, like, the earliest, like, something that is a great example of it. They also mentioned Garbage Pail Kids, which I'd like to talk about at some point.
Well, I'll keep this brief because I know that you and I were talking before we started recording. I have a background in literature, and one of the topics that I cover quite a lot in world literature is the grotesque. There's like ancient precedent for this, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because we do want to talk about like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in a podcast in like renditions and stuff. But it is worth noting, like, the concept of grossing out is not limited to film and has a long-standing tradition, but it's very hard to pin down, like, where does any of this start? Where does film specifically start with the gross out? And I think that John Waters seems to be an example par excellence, especially you cited already, Divine, picking up and quite literally eating dog feces. One of the most iconic scenes in Gross Out. I remember reading something. It was Divine, I guess Divine's mother, out of drag obviously, asked, did you actually eat dog feces? And they said, I didn't have the heart to tell her. Which I think is fantastic. Also, like, the very act is nauseating. I don't want to vilify Divine, obviously, for doing it because we'll say it's a choice. It's a bold choice.
Committed choice.
But undeniably an iconic one. Like I'm going to just go out there and say, like, it's not a choice I would ever make. But
and we don't kink shame around here.
We do not kink shame. Just if you're going to participate in kinks that don't, kinks should not harm other people. Like, they shouldn't exploit other people. I say exploit instead because like, there's impact play, and again, not kink shaming anybody.
To that.
Oh, we should
exactly.
That should be a topic for a podcast.
Impact play.
No,
yeah, we can talk about that.
We talk about kink and horror.
Oh,
absolutely.
That movie, the movie I mentioned earlier.
There's one called Dogs Don't Wear Pants that I'd love to talk about.
Oh, but what I was going to say was, if you're going to do a kink that does run risk, make sure you have the proper protections, and that's all.
And this has been your PSA for the day.
Cue some sort of musical chime. Back to the topic.
I did find a little bit about one of the earliest American splatter films.
Ooh.
According to Wikipedia, it's Blood Feast, and it was made in 1963.
Herschel Gordon Lewis. I love Blood Feast.
I don't think I've ever seen this movie.
So tell us about it, Johnny.
Yeah, tell us about it, Johnny.
I don't really remember. I know a guy in the movie. He owns the diner. I think it's a diner. He's fuck. I don't remember.
No worries.
The movie.
I'm looking at it. It's a murder movie. It looks like. Well, okay. How about this? I have a better plan. Tell us a little bit about Herschel Gordon Lewis.
He is.
There you go.
The I don't know if it's self-proclaimed godfather of gore. Because that's debatable for me. Because for me, I feel like that's Dario Argento. But we're not going to argue or debate about that right now. Yeah, Herschel Gordon Lewis also directed The Wizard of Gore. I don't know if y'all have seen that.
I only know about it because of Elliot Page and was it Luke Wilson watching it in Juno?
Yes. Wait,
yes.
Did they? No. Oh, they did watch that. They did watch that. Sorry, they watched Blood Feast in Serial Mom.
Oh, with Mrs. Puff.
No, not with Mrs. Puff. She was the neighbor. But yes, Mrs. Puff is in Serial Mom. But yeah, there was actually a sequel to Blood Feast. I never saw the second one. So
that was the earliest example I could find of actual like gross out horror. It's such a weird like open category that it's hard to find where it originated.
Right. And it branches off. And I think, bringing this back to what really inspired this episode for us was the Greasy Strangler from 2016. I am hard pressed. I want to call it vile, but that has negative implications. And I don't want you to think I mean negatively. The movie is vile in the best way possible.
It is so vile. But it's wonderful. I would also like to kind of like add to that. Fried Berry is very similar to the Greasy Strangler.
Yes.
The director of Fried Berry is the director of the Street Trash remake.
Oh.
So probably definitely
that might not be terrible.
Watch that.
Yeah, that'll be our homework after this episode.
Yes.
I've heard good things about the remake. A friend of mine saw it recently. He said it was pretty good.
And you, dear listener, your homework is to watch the Greasy Strangler.
Yeah, because you need to know what Hootie Tootie Disco Cutie. Hootie Tootie Disco Cutie.
Hootie Tootie Disco Cutie. We're totally in sync there.
Yo,
totally in sync there. Okay, let's try that again on 3. 1, 2, 3. Hootie Tootie Disco Cutie.
Oh, wow.
My
we are terrible.
We're doing great.
Oh. Jeez, I'm leaving all of that in. I'm not cutting it out.
Please. Oh my God. No. The editing. Yeah, this is what you get, y'all, though. You're getting like the raw cut. We're We're here, we're live, we're committed, and we're unhinged.
Yeah, I'm not planning on cutting a lot of this. I'm just letting you know. Anything that you hear is probably just being left in because that's just how we talk to each other. And we figure that's probably the best format for this podcast instead of doing it like super edited.
Yes.
So that I know I keep going back to about how the format's going to be, but it's probably important that you know that.
We really wanted this to be informal. We wanted to just kind of talk with you about the things that we find interesting, and hopefully you find interesting too. So about Hootie Tootie Disco Cutie, a little bit about Greasy Strangler. The three of us watched this film together and inadvertently roped in friends as well who didn't know what they were getting into.
So my partner and friend of ours they do not watch horror movies. It is very difficult for me to get them to watch anything that is bad B horror as it is. And then we subjected them, these poor men, we subjected them to the Greasy Strangler.
I don't remember. Was he there with us?
Mac was there too.
I'm so sorry.
It's just the film, and I say this as a compliment, is like watching a train wreck. You just can't look away.
I would like to add that it is also not for everyone. It is a very bad movie, and maybe not to your taste, but there are people out there that will enjoy it, and will enjoy it very much.
The reason why we're discussing this one, above all, is if you are interested in B horror, body horror, or gross out horror, you watch a lot of trauma, whatever. It was mind-blowing to us. And we watch a lot, like I said, we watch a lot of those movies. We've seen some terrible stuff.
This film does not have a letter in the alphabet to coordinate. Like, there's B horror. No. This is like transcended the alphabet.
It's on a different plane.
It's on a different plane of existence altogether. A little bit about it. I think we should probably kind of contextualize a little. So, like, maybe a spoiler alert here for like a few minutes.
Spoiler alert.
That was beautiful. We don't have sound effects right now, so spoiler alert. So it's about a father and son who run a disco walking tour, and just think about how that works for a moment, because it barely does. And the father just makes shit up, like the whole movie.
They're bullshit artists.
Yes, they are bullshit artists, and they call each other such throughout the film.
Bullshit artists.
They both fall in love with the same woman and basically compete for her attention.
And we love her.
We love her. She's the Hootie Tootie Disco Cutie. And she knows it too. In the midst of this, there is a killer who is strangling people and who is coated in grease. Like, that is literally why we have the title The Greasy Strangler. And we find out that it's the dad. That isn't really a spoiler. Like, that happens within minutes of the film, I think. But the best part of that, though, is to get the grease off. He goes to a car wash and just walks through it.
Yeah,
and that's that. So the film is coated in grease from top to bottom. The dad loves eating greasy foods. He'll get like hot dogs and coat them in grease or dip them into bacon grease. Has vats of grease. He is obsessed with grease and disco. Grease and disco.
Imagine making grease and disco your entire personality.
I mean, they made a film about it called Greasy Strangler. It basically comes to a head with the two of them fighting for the love of Janet, who first chooses the dad and then falls in love with the son. Weird relationship they're in.
Does he become... I know this is probably also spoiler alert. Does he become like a were-grease monster? Because I feel like he's not really self-aware when he's covered in grease.
It's hard to say because the film doesn't really answer that question.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
That's probably a really dumb question.
It seems to suggest that being coated in grease is like a were-grease monster.
Like a werewolf transformation, but grease.
Yeah, like he just slathers grease on himself and then he just blacks
we also
out
should
and goes on
mention
a
his
killing
dick
spree.
is out through most of the movie, but it's like
Oh yeah, penis warning.
it's like a anteater snoot.
Yeah,
both of them. Both of them,
just
but
the snout of an anteater.
But
Awful.
one of them is like horse hung, and the other is like micro penis. And like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful because all bodies like don't want to body shame in any capacity. I'm not trying to suggest there's any value to one or the other. They are prosthetics, and they are deliberately portrayed this way. And it's that weird, like, I don't want to call it incestuous tension, but it's competition with the father, which has like very Freudian undertones. And Freud is a problematic piece of shit. But you know, other than that,
It felt like Tim and Eric made this movie.
I thought it was Tim and Eric because one of the actors looks like one of them.
Yeah, I did too.
Also, it does give off trauma vibes a little bit, like that low budget trauma feel.
The fact that this came out in 2016 is pretty crazy because a lot of we were kind of past the point of gross out horror about this time. Like we don't have a lot of it much anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can't think of an analog to this film in the last like almost 10 years. Like there are ones that are gross out, but
I'm kind of looking around. We've got Uncle Peckerhead. That's probably. Did you see that one? That one's pretty.
I think we watched that with you. That's
where
he
became like a were-zombie.
And that's the band that's on tour. Right? Yes, we did watch that with you.
No. I'm trying to find a couple of others, but I honestly think there really hasn't been. Oh, Tusk falls under gross out horror.
Yes. I mean, Tusk is a great example of gross out horror, but I still don't think it reaches quite that level of Greasy Strangler, because with Greasy Strangler, you have like not just gross out comedy, it is perplexing. It is a world turned upside down.
Yeah.
It's very, very surreal in its manner. And I will say it culminates with surrealism because father and son both kill the lover. They're both covered in grease and they strangle her to death and they go on a rampage. And then they witness themselves being killed and then continue to run off.
The only other, because I'm looking at dates here on the aesthetics.fandom.com wiki about gross out horror. And the only other things that I can see that were after Greasy Strangler were something called Cyst, which I have never seen.
I have actually never seen that either, but I did like the cover.
Before then, it was Poultrygeist, Slither, and then we had the Human Centipede series. I feel like Greasy Strangler was like the icing on the cake, or the grease on the cake, if you will.
What?
I mean, Human Centipede definitely falls under this category.
Oh, absolutely.
The second one is just flat out disgusting.
The third one is trash.
I just pulled up
is garbage.
I just pulled up a film on Wikipedia to see the date, and it's actually around this time because Greasy Strangler was 2016. Johnny and I watched Bite from 2015.
I was literally just thinking about that movie too.
It's about a woman who travels for her honeymoon, or not honeymoon, bachelorette weekend.
Yes.
And she and her friends go swimming in this lake and she gets bitten by a bug. But this bug isn't just any bug. She begins transforming into it and it's gross. Very, very gross. Her whole apartment is coated like Nest. So now that I think about it, like it's around the same time period. What was with people and coating their houses in grease and bugs?
Well, I think it was just what happened in our country. I guess
2016.
What happened in our world in 2016? I think isn't that what American Horror Story?
We just jumped timelines at some point.
Timelines. I don't want to suggest that these are inherently political movies because they don't seem to tie directly, but they come out of a specific socio-political time period. And there was a lot of panic.
Here, let's go to 2010. I feel like that's probably a good before, because movies get made shortly after that. So major events. I just want to see what happened. That was the Chile earthquake. That was the Gulf of Mexico oil rig explosion. So the millions of gallons of oil into the oil spill.
Interesting too, because that does, tie into the whole idea of like that coded. I don't want to call it that's an aesthetic, because that was a natural disaster that we're still recovering from.
But horror always imitates life. There's no doubt about that. So like going back and kind of seeing what happened makes a lot of sense. There were, let's see, that was the Boston Marathon attack.
It's not in 2012.
Oh no, sorry, that was 2013. I'm just kind of sorry. I just realized this is all from Wikipedia. I just kind of looked up to see what happened during those years, and that was an election year. So honestly, it was probably if I had to guess, that oil spill was bad, and we were talking about it for years. So honestly, that would make sense if that correlates with all of this grease and gore and grime, because then we also had, what was the other one? When did Rabid Grannies come out?
Like 1980, I want to say like 84.
I just want to say all of the 80s ones were probably piggyback on the stuff. Like realistically.
Came out in 1988. I was close.
People also search for the Greasy Strangler when they look up.
I just want to point out that Fried Berry, which we were going to talk about as well, came out in 2020, 4 years after the Greasy Strangler, which was also an election year. Mind you, though, Fried Berry is South African, which is different socio-political and contextual climate.
That is true.
So that is worth considering, but it is interesting just that we have a similar...
Yeah, honestly, there really wasn't much. Now that I'm looking at this list of gross out horror, there wasn't much past that. That the Fried Berry was kind of like the peak of the iceberg or the peak of the mountain, and then there was really nothing after that. The only other thing that there has been lately is the Street Trash remake and Fried Berry and Uncle Peckerhead. Like I like to stick that one in there because I feel like it's pretty gross.
I'm going to throw this out there too for the person who's listening that's like, you missed this. We are going off of our experience, and while we do have extensive knowledge on horror and film and we are human too.
If we miss something, please tell us because we want to see it.
We want suggestions, but come at us with respect and kindness because we're fragile babies.
I also just watch a lot of movies, and sometimes things just run together, and I can't remember details, even if I've seen it like hundreds of times.
And like I said, we're doing this casually and to just interact and have fun. But if you have suggestions for us and are like, yeah, you missed this and you should totally watch it, tell us. We would love suggestions. But actually, this is something else that kind of, if we're talking about the context of horror films and gross out, one that we kind of touched base on before we started today was Mondo films.
We also missed... Oh, wait, no, that's a trauma. I was going to say Frankenhooker's a trauma film, huh? Oh, that's a whole different category.
I almost spit out my coffee.
Just kidding!
We'll talk about that at some point.
Killer Condom, was that trauma? Was that trauma? I don't think it was.
Well, I think we can agree Trauma has a lot of campy and gross out horror.
It was distributed
absolutely.
by Trauma.
They go hand in hand.
So yeah, we'll Trauma is a whole category. Like let's actually touch on Trauma a little bit. Trauma was one of the first gross out horror film companies as a whole. They produced and made just the weirdest stuff they possibly could. Lloyd Kaufman is, honestly, I think he's a B-movie genius because his B-movies are actually fun to watch. He somehow captures some... There's whimsy in Trauma films that make you want more, but you can't look away, but you really fall in love with these characters. But it's also really gross.
A lot of it hinges on camp. Yeah. A lot of it hinges on that idea that it's not taking itself purely seriously. It's taking itself seriously as an art form, but the subject matter is usually treated beyond irony. It's pure play. And Trauma seems to have mastered that with the idea of taking horror, using these elements, and deliberately using them while throwing them out the window at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, I feel like Lloyd Kaufman is like the Mel Brooks of horror, right? Like, you have to kind of look at him and go, okay, it's not serious, but he makes some seriously good B movies. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
they're not good, but for B movies, they're great.
They were never meant to be good, though, I think is the point, too, because people come to them and say, like, why was this made? It's like, it was made deliberately to be bad.
For
There is a
funsies.
place for this kind of material, and it's usually a form of outsider art.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the lens through which we should look at a lot of this material, because a lot of people try to hold it up against, like if we all watched The Neon Demon together, which I think we can agree, incredible film.
A lot
Love
of
it.
people hated it, though. I feel like we're in the minority.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm just pointing out that, it is held as a film that has a high aesthetic. It is undeniably a slow burn, but I loved it. But how are you going to compare that to something like Cannibal the Musical? You can't. You can't hold everything to the same aesthetic standard.
But we did just get an Oscar-nominated wonderful film. Can we talk about it?
The Substance.
Can we talk about The Substance?
Yes.
Getting 5 Oscar nominations.
I'm going to say holy guacamole because it's that big.
That's
Holy
a big
guacamole!
deal, considering horror movies tend to get snubbed at the Oscars. And speaking of snubbed, I just want to say, like, I'm very upset that Nicolas Cage didn't get a nomination for Longlegs because he was fantastic in that movie.
Agreed.
I think that was his best role ever. Although Mandy was very good.
Mandy was incredible, but Johnny fell asleep while we were watching that.
Longlegs was Nicolas Cage's 1 hour photo.
Yeah. Honestly, I can go with that. That's cool.
And for those of you who don't know 1 hour photo, it is a movie with Robin Williams. To me, that is his best role.
Did not do well.
It didn't, but people always expected comedy from him, and that's the problem.
It was so refreshing to see him in a role that wasn't comedic.
It felt good. And you could tell he put his heart in that movie because...
Oh, he really did.
That is a phenomenal film.
And there's a small Neon Genesis Evangelion reference in that movie.
Which he also gets wrong, which I think is kind of funny. Because I'm pretty sure... Okay, so remember the kid and like the family he gets obsessed with? He buys that kid a gift for his birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a toy. It was from Neon Genesis Evangelion because Robin Williams apparently loved Evangelion. But if I remember correctly, he's holding up a toy and it's one of the angels, which are the villains. And he's like, oh, that's one of the good guys.
Oh, I never even noticed that.
I'm pretty sure. Let me double check.
So, okay. While you check that, I think that it's important to mention that the Toxic Avenger, because I'm going to touch a little bit more on trauma, but I want to do a whole episode about trauma.
For sure. I
love
love
The Toxic Avenger just apparently is getting it's coming to cinemas, and it is by the Terrifier 3 distributor, and they're promising an unrelated release. This one is something that has been kind of buried for a while. This is from the AustinChronicle.com, by the way. It's like the first one that came up. But they announced it in 2019 that they were doing a reboot, and it has oh gosh, who's in it? It has a ton of people in it. I don't know if you guys have heard about this movie yet, but
the remake?
Yes.
The reboot?
It's got Peter Dinklage. It's got Elijah Wood. It's got Kevin Bacon. It's got a lot of people in it, and I'm really excited for it. I didn't know if it was going to happen. So we have news as of like 2 days ago that it is going to be in some theaters, and it's got a 92 on tomato meter fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty high. I'll drop this in our notes. But
I just found confirmation. The doll or toy that he's holding is indeed one of the angels.
Ah.
It's the good guys.
I would also like to add that, like, I don't want to say Trauma was like my introduction into horror because it wasn't. It was Nightmare on Elm Street, but Trauma kind of pushed my limits as to what I could watch because of its gross out horror. And I think the first movie I saw from Trauma was The Toxic Avenger. And there's that scene at the diner where like he like deep fries that guy's hands, and I'm pretty sure like he throws another guy like inside the oven. There's just like a lot of blood and a lot of carnage, and I'm like, I can vibe with this.
What is this? Was
Toxic
probably
Avenger.
no. I meant like when I first saw it, I was like, "What is this?" And
Oh,
how do I find more of it?
See, my first introductions to trauma, Cannibal the Musical is under the trauma bill, right?
Yes.
is it?
I think
Is it?
so.
believe
Oh,
it is.
okay.
I'll double check that one,
Oh,
but the
wait.
other one that I saw was Ferocious Female Freedom Fighters.
No.
Yes, Cannibal the Musical was distributed by Trauma.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And is Ferocious Female Freedom Fighters trauma?
I'm pretty sure that one is as well.
I'm pretty sure it is trauma. It is trauma. It's on their website. It's a redub of a film. And those aren't really horror, but it also like questioned what could be film for me.
I think pushing the boundaries and trying to create or stir something that's, as humans, we're interesting because we don't want to see these things, but we do want to see these things, but we don't want to see these things, but we do. And I think that a lot of these films, they give you a reaction that you wouldn't normally get. Like I feel like we were all Rotten.com kids, weren't we?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely was.
I was
frequented
too.
that website so much. I don't know why.
There-
It's just I could not look away.
Right.
I just kept going.
I did have
because of that, I've become so desensitized to a lot of what I see in horror movies. Like I'm just like, oh, that's nothing. Like I've seen worse.
But like people like us, and I say like us because we're Rotten.com is a different level of like gore, right? It's real, right? It's real.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that filmmakers trying to, when you look at stuff like that, there are feelings that well up inside of you that you don't often feel, right? It's a lot of feelings all at one time. It's a combination of feelings depending on how you feel about it. It's a combination of feelings that I think that, or like a lot of campy horror sci-fi movies try to replicate, and I think that's fascinating.
Well, saying that too, again, we talked about this before we started today, how this even has precedent in exploitation films from like the 60s and the Mondo film.
Let's get into Mondo.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with Mondo films, it stems from the film Mondo Cane from 1962. I'm looking at the Wikipedia because while I do know what it translates dog world. Apparently in Italian, according to Wikipedia, it's a somewhat coarse Italian expletive. I couldn't find exactly what makes it an expletive, but it has negative implications. The whole premise of the Mondo film stems from this and other films of the time period, in which basically we have exploitative comparisons, usually in the forms of discussions of sex, death, and very loosely termed ethnography in anthropological studies. And I say loosely because they were often incredibly exploitative, problematic, and were often not accurate. But we get these films that are incredibly shocking. For example, Faces of Death. I know that we tried watching that and switched because we were, in our public Discord, and we're like, maybe this isn't the thing we watch right now.
Right.
Yeah,
but I just
watch that with people. Like I feel like would not enjoy that.
I do remember the discomfort of watching it too, because there are some. I don't want to go too in depth with some of the scenes because they are quite rough, but there are scenes that involve violence. As watching, and I was just like, this is a bit uncomfortable, but also thinking like, oh, there are other people on our Discord right now who might not want to see this. Maybe we should shift gears.
Right.
But it was a simultaneous discomfort of the image, but it's compelling in what is there because it's something we don't often see. But that's also why they were referred to as exploitation films, because often they did exploit these things. Now, do I want to suggest that every image that we see of these things is exploitative? Not necessarily, but there is that risk as well. And certainly exploitation films try to take that kind of feeling that you're discussing, VK, to the absolute limit.
Oh, it's meant to shock. Yeah, more than anything else.
Certainly led to things like Rotten.com.
Well, we also had Cannibal Holocaust. I feel like that's really important to add to that list. It's
Mhm.
didn't they was that it's definitely that goes into exploitation cinema. I think that we should
Yes.
maybe do like another episode of exploitation cinema where we discuss this a lot further
Right.
and
Yeah.
kind of talk a little bit about things like people thought Cannibal Holocaust was real, didn't they? Or
Yeah.
was,
So,
I can't remember.
to be fair,
go ahead.
there were aspects of it that were real. There were real animal mutilations, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
one of the major controversies.
There's
Johnny,
a real animal death.
I know where you're going with the next thing. Go ahead and
So the director was under investigation because I'm sure you've seen the scene of the girl like on the cross, kind of like spit roasted through the spike kind of thing. He was brought to court for murder of this actor, and he had to bring her to court to prove that she was still alive.
That's
And
I
that it
didn't
was
even know
just
that.
yeah, like it was there was like this big investigation around it, and he was brought in because they thought he literally murdered this person because that's how real the film felt.
Yeah. I didn't see it until like a few months ago because I had never seen it. It was a lot for me. I was like, this looks real. I can see why people thought that it was real.
Well, it also comes off that trend too of the actual exploitation film and the Mondo film to kind of portray something shocking. And while it was fictional, it was presented somewhat as factual. I mean, think about I use the word loosely, the controversy of like Blair Witch Project
Yeah.
in its marketing campaign. People thought these were real disappearances, which I mean, successful marketing campaign ? But
Cloverfield did a similar thing. They had like this whole conspiracy about like some secret offshore oil rig.
Yeah, but
like,
that was
played a part. I know it doesn't fall under this; that's different. But they did the marketing for it. Is what I'm saying was
right.
Like,
my point though is the realism of the marketing, because Cloverfield, what distinguishes Cloverfield's thorough marketing and undeniably impressive marketing from Blair Witch is Blair Witch's was verisimilitude. It was meant to emulate like these were real disappearances, and because we're talking rudimentary use of the internet and public internet still growing, people weren't able to make those distinctions between like, is this factual documentation or is this film? And it obviously was film.
Is it War of the Worlds or is it War of the Worlds?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, is it real or is it like so many people they all thought it was real. It's the same thing. And I think it's really interesting when filmmakers do things like that because found footage became such a wild thing after the Blair Witch Project. I think that was one of the first ones, wasn't it?
The first one was the last broadcast. I'm pretty sure it's like classified as like the first found footage film. I personally love found footage films because I like that aspect of it. Like, this is real, even though you know it's not because you're watching a movie, but I like how it pulls you in to like feel that it's real. And like when the camera's not showing what you want to see, like you're constantly like trying to move around to try and see past or like outside the boundaries of the lens, even though you know you can't, but you try to anyway.
Which is interesting because like I want to point out, like we started with gross out horror, and not that we're like, I mean, I guess we're able to ramble and move off topic, but it's interesting because found footage often tries to capture that unease as well through a different means.
That is very true.
And I realize, you know, a lot of horror is predicated on that sense of ill ease, sitting there and making the audience uncomfortable. But it is interesting to think of that idea of like, a lot of people can't watch found footage because it makes them dizzy. A lot of people can't watch gross out horror because it makes them sick. And it's interesting to think of horror as a way to kind of give us those kind of gut reactions that make us feel ill, but often wanting more.
Okay, speaking of off that, what is like one thing that like you see in movies that kind of makes you sick to your stomach or like kind of makes you feel uneasy? For me, it's like when they pull like long strands of hair out of their mouth, or like when fingernails get ripped off.
Yep, I was going to say fingernails.
Or anything with like teeth being pulled.
Oh, I have an example.
Like cringe a little bit.
John,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'd have to say mine. It's anything being pushed into eyes or fingernails being pulled off. The scene in Brightburn, that really made me uneasy. Like and they showed it in the trailer. I wish they hadn't done that. But he has a little piece of glass and he pushes it into her eye, and you can see the eye separate. Like, that shit fucks me up. I cannot do it.
Well, it goes back to if we look, at Un Chien Andalou by Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali. There's that famous eye cutting scene that made so many people uncomfortable. And I mean, if you look at it, and it's very obvious when you look, it's a bovine eye, which doesn't make it much better because it's practical effects. And while it was a cadaver, like, you see the viscera of the eye.
Still
Eyes,
real.
yeah, it's a very sensitive subject matter, and thus something that's very uncomfortable. Eyes do it for me. Fingernails. But there was one time that Johnny and I were watching one of those really shitty Truth or Dare movies, because there were like 20 at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And they're in this house, and the ghost or spirit or whatever it is tells them through the TV how to, like, satisfy it. And they're told to cut off, like, digits in living tissue. And I was having a condition where one of my tendons was snapping in my middle finger at the time.
Oh, no.
It was really bad, so much that I was, like, concerned that I was going to have surgery. And I was reading about that while watching this, and I got really dizzy and lightheaded. I'm like, I'm gonna go lie down, because they were, like, pulling fingernails and cutting off fingers.
You connected with it at the time.
I was just like, this is a little bit too much for me right at this moment.
There was actually a scene where it's in one of the Final Destination movies. I don't remember which one. But it's when the girl she's getting corrective eye surgery, and I can relate to this because I wear glasses, and I have considered getting corrective eye surgery, but then after seeing this movie, I'm like, no, fuck this, I'm not doing this, because you have to be awake for it. Like,
yeah, and they laser your eye.
My grandmother,
and yeah, I'm like seeing that scene, like, and obviously, shit goes wrong, and I think like lasers through her eye. And yeah,
my ex had LASIK, and he said he was awake the whole time, and he could smell his eyeball burning.
Like, I can't do that. No.
Grandma was getting corrective surgery, and they point it right at your eye, and she started panicking. I was like, and, like, I don't blame her, because something's literally coming at your eye, and your instinct is self-preservation. It's like, that the doctor isn't doing anything to harm you, but it's still uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. It's something. The eye is a very sensitive area, and that's often why we see it as gross. And I think of the scenes in 28 Days Later, the constant, like, thumbs in the eyes. And when I first saw that, I'm like, oh my God, this is uncomfortable and painful to watch.
Or, like, when you're at the eye doctor and they use that machine and they blow the puff of air into your eye, I can barely do that.
Like, they didn't do that for me. They surprisingly didn't do that for me.
So, for anyone listening, if you're listening on YouTube, leave us a comment. Let us know what genuinely freaks you out in horror movies. I want to hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, so I'll add to that. What freaks you out, or what grosses you out? Yeah. What for you is like a put off for horror films? Is there something that you see and you're like, I can't watch this anymore? We want to know.
What's that fine line? Also, if you have any recommendations for any gross out horrors, let us know.
That we missed.
Because we are always looking for other things. And I really don't have, me personally, I don't have a threshold for, like, what draws the line. For me, I'll watch anything.
I guess the best example of modern gross out would be Terrifier. Like, that's the only series right now that I can think of that is anything remotely close to some of the older ones from the 80s. If you haven't seen the Terrifier series, we've all seen the Terrifier series, right?
Raise your hand if you haven't seen it.
Tell the class.
Okay, now that you've raised your hand, get out of here. No, just kidding.
You should spoilers.
Your homework is to go watch it. We're gonna spoil some stuff here, so if you haven't seen the Terrifier films, either listen in and know that we're going to talk about it, or go watch it right now.
My first introduction to Art the Clown was actually in the movies All Hallows Eve, which I think was before Terrifier was a thing. It's based on a series. There's like 3 or 4 vignettes throughout the movie. And I think one of them is like just Art the Clown stalking some woman in a subway. And that was and I think his face was on the cover, which kind of unsettled me because I'm not big on clowns, but I love Art the Clown.
I had to go back after I saw 1, 2, and 3 and go watch All Hallows Eve. And I wasn't maybe I'm in the minority here, but like I wasn't impressed with All Hallows Eve. Like I get why we went to the direction of the Terrifier series, but like it just felt like a shortened version of all the gore of the Terrifier one.
Yeah, and I think that's why they expanded on it. I do want to talk about a very specific scene in the second film, which caused a big commotion. It is the bedroom scene. I know a lot of people, or I have heard that a lot of people were walking out during this scene. But
I thought it was hilarious.
me too, because like when you see a lot of gore in a horror movie, I'm gonna reference the movie Dead Alive, which for me is one of Peter Jackson's better movies. If you didn't know, Peter Jackson actually started off making really bad horror movies before he directed Lord of the Rings. Meet the Feebles, Bad Taste, Dead Alive. Check them out. Worth the watch for sure. But there's a scene in the movie Dead Alive towards the end with the lawnmower, and it's one of those scenes that like it's like so gory, but you start laughing. And that's kind of what happened to me during the scene in Terrifier 2. It just became silly.
To contextualize a little bit there, basically what happens is Art terrorizes the protagonist's friend and for all intents and purposes slices her, cuts her, beats her, breaks her arm so hard that he just like tears it off, which it just doesn't make sense. It's so silly. And then if that's not enough, she's like bleeding out. He goes and gets like bleach?
No, bleach and salt.
And pours it on her.
Oh yeah, he pours it into her wounds.
It's just so stupid. Like she would have been dead by then. Like
Absolutely.
Realistically. And the smile on his face is what makes it. And obviously we're not condoning this violence in real life, but in the film it's so over the top.
It just becomes silly. And I feel, you know what? That's what's interesting about the Terrifier series. Going back to like stirring emotions in you, I think the Terrifier series is meant to make you laugh because it is so ridiculous. There are moments where it's like, oh god, that's awful.
Because Art is just so funny, and the best part is he doesn't say a word.
No.
Everything he does is just through his facial expressions, and it's funny. Like he'll kill somebody, he'll just make like laughing faces, like something a clown would do.
It's the definition
of chainsaw.
Slapstick.
He puts a chainsaw up somebody's ass in the third one.
He does.
Yeah.
So there's a point where we're watching, and it also does question like it harkens back to things like the satanic panic and people freaking out and saying watching this stuff will make you violent. And there really haven't been studies that demonstrate that to be the case. But it is interesting because a lot of the objection in particular is that there are victims who are children who end up getting killed. And while they are in the minority of the victims of Art the clown, there's one scene where they're blown up and you don't really see it happen because you just see the explosion. But there is another where you do see a kid being killed. And that's the objection some people have. And, you know, that's their prerogative, but it's also fiction. Like it's meant to be over the top.
I don't have that problem killing kids in horror movies.
There's a really good
But don't kill the pets.
podcast. Yeah, I think it was She Kills podcast. I don't know if you've heard that one. It might have been a different podcast. I can't remember off the top of my head. But they did a whole episode about how and what we get uncomfortable over in horror. Mm-hmm. And I feel like because since you mentioned kids for so long were off limits, and pets are always a very like I get upset when the dog dies. Like it makes
Justice
me
for that
sad.
Dog in that elevator movie.
Right. We'll have to talk about.
Yes.
We should do a whole episode about the elevator movies we've watched because we've watched a lot of them.
Just know, y'all.
Elevator horror.
We'll get there. We had an elevator horror day and watched a movie and then started another and found out that it was a remake of the same movie by the same director.
It was crazy.
And then we just spiraled into like
horror
movies that were based around elevators. 6
elevator movies we watched in one day. After that, I was like, "Oh, are we gonna keep going?"
And we did.
We are a mess.
Yeah. Now, it was back to that idea of I think specifically of Dr. Sleep, because there's that one scene towards the beginning where they kill the kid and harvest his soul. Apparently, it was very difficult for the actors to hold it together because the kid was acting so well.
Oh.
Because like his screams of pain, some actors were like, "This is very intense," and acting is intense.
Right.
Especially when you're doing something like that. I think of other scenes and like this isn't one that obviously is horror, and I'm not necessarily a big fan. Please don't come for me. But like The Office, I remember there was a scene apparently. Jim expresses not anger at Pam, but he tells her he's not interested anymore because he's dating Karen, or whatever. The person who plays Pam, Jenna Fisher, talked to, it's John Krasinski, right?
Yes.
Yeah, John Krasinski, and made sure that he wasn't mad at her or upset. And I guess she was in tears.
Oh.
Acting can be incredibly taxing to separate, the emotions in the scene from reality because you have to kind of embody it. But I'm getting a bit off track here, I suppose. But the threshold that we find in horror, I guess that is what horror also questions. What are our thresholds? Where do we find limits? And bringing it full circle, I guess, Greasehouse pushes us to the very, very greasy limits of humanity.
Oh. I like what you did there.
Wow.
I like what you did there. All right. I know you had a little fact that you wanted to
so just
express.
So we can end on an exhortation for today. First off, thank you for sitting with us for our first episode. I think I speak for the three of us in saying that if you've made it this far, what the hell is wrong with you? Thank you.
We ramble a lot. A lot of rambling, and I know we got off topic a few times, but it's okay.
We made it back.
We found
our way.
We found our way back.
We have a trajectory. It's just like driving
all over the place.
It's just like driving in circles until you find the Holiday Inn and realize you were actually going for a Denny's. But we made it. We made it. My exhortation for the day comes from the Greasy Strangler trivia page on IMDb. The grease that they used was tapioca pudding. And I think that's something we can all live by.
The more you know.
Or whatever the sound is.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Yes. Thank you all. And again, if you have suggestions or want to tell us what your threshold is for horror or gross out, please let us know. You can subscribe to us on Spotify and YouTube. If you search for Features of the Night, YouTube will be on VampireKitten TV, and on Spotify, Features of the Night will have its own thing. So please subscribe if you like our show and want to hear more. And it is our first one, so be kind. Please be kind. And go tear into a thing of tapioca right now. Yeah. I hope it inspired you to get some tapioca pudding tonight. I don't want tapioca now. I'm hungry. Me too. I am your host, VampireKitten, with Mickle. And I'm Johnny. Cheers, Johnny. Oh, God. I love that. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening.